Atif Mian, House of Debt, How They, and You, Caused the Great Recession, and How We Can Prevent It from Happening Again. In A House of Debt, Atif Mian sheds light on the true causes of severe recessions, specifically focusing on how high household debt leads to economic crises. Throughout the book, Mian unravels the factors that fueled the Great Recession and the Great Depression, pointing towards skyrocketing household debt as the main culprit. The role of the housing bubble, poor lending practices, and the struggles of low-income households are thoroughly examined. As you dive into this summary, expect to gain insights into the catastrophic consequences of household debt and the steps we can take to protect the global economy from future collapses.
The role of household debt in severe recessions. The cause of severe recessions like the Great Depression and the Great Recession is not natural or political disasters nor irrational beliefs infecting public consciousness, but high household debt. From the 1920s to 2007, household debt dramatically increased, causing severe consumer spending cuts and intensifying the harsh effects of a subsequent recession. There is a clear correlation between the amount of household debt before a recession and the amount of spending cuts observed during the downturn. For instance, Ireland and Denmark both experienced greater jumps in household debt, leading to more severe cuts in household spending. Thus, data about consumer debt can help predict the severity of a recession, and without elevated levels of debt, banking crises recessions are unexceptional. Housing bubble debacle. The housing bubble of the early 2000s resulted in serious debt for many Americans, with the poorest borrowers suffering the most. The poor were hit hardest by the collapse of the bubble as their equity was tied to their homes, and foreclosure rates were at an all-time high, lowering the value of homes in the entire neighborhood. On the contrary, the rich borrowed less, had fewer debts, and suffered less from economic downturns. The ripple effect of debt. In times of economic downturn, indebted households tend to sharply cut down on their spending while those without much debt maintain their pre-recession spending levels. Eventually, reduced consumer demand from the indebted households leads to nationwide job losses, impacting the entire economy, both tradable and non-tradable jobs. The effects of the Great Recession on households' net worth reduced overall spending by up to 30% and led to nationwide job losses even in areas that didn't experience significant debt-driven downturns, such as Iowa. The financial services industry also played a significant role in the Great Recession, which will be discussed in later summary parts. The devastating effects of mortgages. Low credit score borrowers received more mortgage credit than those with higher income growth, leading to a housing bubble. The expansion of credit caused a surge in housing prices, which were already high due to high demand and low supply in inelastic cities. Although lenders believed taking on borrowers with bad credit was safe if prices continued to rise, the opposite was true. The housing bubble was fueled by zealous lending to borrowers who had little chance of paying off their new debts. The deceptive origins of the Great Recession. The U.S. government began buying mortgages from local banks in the 1970s, and this financial practice led to mortgage-backed securities, MBS. Private label MBS developed in the 1990s, which used a structure called tranching. Tranching misled investors to think the level of risk associated with the precarious underlying mortgages was lower. Ultimately, private label MBS led to lowered lending standards. Mortgages that didn't conform to MBS criteria were accepted. Fraud was used to deceive investors into thinking they were buying super-safe securities. This led to the Great Recession of 2007. Banks, bailouts, and the Great Recession. The Great Recession was a result of collapsed consumer spending, leading to a massive drop in demand for bank loans. Banks were bailed out by the government, but the economy still suffered. The dot-com bubble burst in 2000, leading to a $5 trillion drop in stock prices, but the consequences were not as severe as the Great Recession. The Great Recession was a challenging period for the U.S. economy, and banks were at the heart of the crisis. Initially, the government used taxpayer money to protect banks, hoping that they would continue lending money and improve the economy. However, as we learned in previous parts, it all comes down to collapsed consumer spending. Loans are assets to a bank, and indebted households began defaulting around 2006, leading to bank asset suffering. The cost of financing at banks shot up in late 2008, leading to loans to businesses being in high demand. The borrowing and lending system that powers much of our economy was in distress, and it only improved after the government intervened to supply funding. While banks were no longer in trouble after the government bailout, bank loans to businesses continued to fall, indicating a massive drop in demand for bank loans. One study showed that just 5% of small businesses cited bank financing or interest rates as their biggest concern during the financial crisis. On the other hand, concerns about poor sales were at 35%, up from 10% before the recession. The dot-com bubble burst in 2000, leading to a $5 trillion drop in stock prices. However, the consequences for the entire economy weren't nearly as bad as what happened during the Great Recession. This was because owners of hyped stocks tended to come from wealthy households with little debt. Spending across the economy even increased between 2000 and 2002, despite the stock collapse. In conclusion, the Great Recession was a result of collapsed consumer spending, leading to massive drops in demand for bank loans. Although banks were bailed out by the government, the economy still suffered, leading to years of cautious spending. Debt forgiveness for economic recovery. The author proposes debt restructuring and forgiveness as a more effective way to stimulate economic recovery than inflation or public spending. Debt-driven downturns result in deflation and wage decreases, creating a vicious cycle. By forgiving debt, both debtors and creditors can benefit and avoid the negative consequences of debt-driven recessions. Examples like the Great Depression and mortgage cram-downs demonstrate how debt forgiveness can work. This approach would motivate borrowers to keep up with payments and encourage banks to maintain high standards while still forgiving some debt. Shared responsibility mortgages. Shared responsibility mortgages, or SRMs, could be a potential solution for avoiding debt-driven recessions. Under an SRM system, the lender protects the borrower if the home price drops, while the borrower agrees to share 5% of capital gains on the house. By tying mortgage payments to the local house price index, SRMs also encourage more household spending, prevent job losses, and would produce billions of dollars in spending due to more stable housing prices and higher consumer spending, with absolutely no increase in government expenditures. In addition to preventing foreclosures, SRMs would also lead to less negative equity and less decline in net worth among low-income households. With SRMs, even if someone had trouble paying their mortgage, they could still sell their equity, allowing them to move somewhere cheaper and avoid a foreclosure.
As we've seen, the key driver of severe recessions, like the Great Recession, is high household debt. Throughout A House of Debt, the author delves into the housing bubble, the dangers of risky lending practices, and the disproportionate effect on low-income households. Mian argues that to prevent future economic crises, governments must restructure and forgive debt rather than focusing solely on inflation and public spending. The book encourages exploring shared responsibility mortgages (SRMs) as a means to safeguard the economy against future severe recessions, ultimately preventing job losses, maintaining stable housing prices, and guarding the global economy from collapse.